We recognize that we are joined by participants from different parts of the country, different parts of the world. And for those of you who may not have interacted with me, my name is Wangeshi Muriuki. I represent Invest in Africa, who are the organizers and the coordinators of this engagement that is organized in partnership with Strathmore University Business School. And it's a great pleasure again to welcome you to our Ask the Expert session, which is running for the very first time as a follow-up to the dialogue series by IIA and Strathmore University that was conducted last week. And just to talk about the IIA Dialogue Series, I want to just remind us and mention that this initiative was conceptualized by Invest in Africa last year when we ran the first dialogue series in September to rally actors and players who work around SME development towards building resilience of SMEs by minimizing the exposure to disaster risks in collaboration with stakeholders. And that's how we approached Strathmore University that accepted our offer and joined us in championing this engagement that is aimed at ensuring that this country and also in Africa, we have a proper framework to help us in addressing the issue and the subject of risk from all angles and all dimensions. Allow me also to encourage other partners that have come on board and collaborators in supporting this initiative and ensuring that the effort, the dialogue series and the post-dialogue engagement series continue, strongly, and that we are involving and engaging our collaborators effectively. So we are working in collaboration with the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs. Those of you who were here last time got to listen to their contribution by one of the panelists. We are working with the MasterCard Foundation. We have the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, and we are also collaborating with the Ministry of Industrialization, Trade and Enterprise, being the main representative of government where SMEs are hosted and on the back of the work that they are doing. So this is part of the dialogue series that we've been conducting and part of the first phase of this engagement. Our focus today is to engage our experts. As you realize, during the last week, we had a team of very, very good experts, and time was not adequate. We also had a crash on Zoom, as Muthoni has mentioned, and we quickly put together this Ask the Expert session to allow you as a participant or as an SME a dedicated time to engage and interact with our expert panelists, to follow up and learn more from their best practices, from their experience. And this is themed on two areas, as Muthoni has mentioned. One is partnering for risk-informed SMEs, because that is so important. How do we build partnerships around that? And we do have our experts to take us through, to engage. We'll also be focusing on outreach and knowledge for SME resilience. So these are, it's an exciting time, it's an exciting session. I'm personally looking forward to it, to engage and interact with our experts. We've got every chance to engage, to ask questions, to seek clarification. And I really want to commend our panelists and our experts who've taken time out of their busy schedule to be with us. We don't really take this for granted. And this afternoon, allow me to just acknowledge the presence and mention them by name of our experts. So we are first of all joined by Dr. Njoki Maruma, who is the assistant professor at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. And she's joining us all the way from the US. It's very, very early in the morning. She will be introducing herself to us, but we also had an opportunity to listen to her last week. And I just want to say that Njoki is so committed to proactive global disaster management. And then we are also joined by our guest expert, Mr. Stephen Odua, representing the Ministry of Industrialization, Trade and Enterprise Development. And I must say that we are truly honored to have the ministry involved and outline its commitments and the work that they have been doing. So Stephen is a director at the ministry in charge of industrialization, but more than that, he also heads and leads on private sector engagement. So he's a seasoned expert. He's had a lot of experiences, and last week we got to understand or to learn about how the government is addressing the issues of disaster risk resilience, programs that are available for SMEs. He also talked about the integrated activities and so many different approaches that were seemingly new, even for us who are intermediaries and working around the space. And we believe that this is such an important session for us to learn and identify how we could collaborate more with the government, what we can easily plug onto. So it's really our session to narrow that awareness and information gap that sometimes does exist between us and what is really happening there. And therefore, I would want to really welcome everybody this afternoon and declare this session open and invite us to really contribute and make this session, make the best out of this session, because it is unique and it's quite a special session. I also want to acknowledge our moderator, Ms. Mudhoni Njogu, who leads the Muiga Youth Empowerment Group as a social entrepreneur who will be taking us through the sessions. So allow me to just bring our guest, Dr. Njoki, onto the floor and take it up from there. So welcome everybody, enjoy the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wageshi Muriuki, and thank you very much to our guests who are taking time in their day-to-day to be with us here. I do appreciate your commitment to coming here, not just to learn from us, but also to co-create and co-develop with us the understanding of what is going on and what your experiences are. So thank you all also to the panelists and to the organizers as well for this opportunity. So as Wageshi has very aptly put, my name is Joki Mwarumba. I am actually currently a professor of emergency management and disaster science at the University of Nebraska in Omaha. But more pertinent and more closer home to Kenya, where I am from, the Strathmore Business School has been very proactive, very forward thinking, and they have actually decided that in their business school, they will be developing and launching a program that is going to be looking at some of the challenges that we are addressing here today and more. So in as far as how it is that you can connect, not only can you connect through the various organizations that you are involved with and the government and what they also have to offer, but I think it is also important, and I am here to encourage and represent the value of knowledge and outreach. Disaster science is actually a science. Emergency management planning is actually a discipline in and of itself that enables people like you where you're at to give you a support and to walk alongside you so that you are not overwhelmed, because it is in our field where we have research, pre-existing data, pre-existing best practices with which we can share with you. So that is a tip of the iceberg for what it is that I am involved in. And I do thank you very much for the time that you have taken to be with us. And I look forward to hearing from you, and especially asking me more directly questions that have to do with what it is that you might be interested in as well. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon and good morning to those who are in a different time zone. I'm also delighted to be with you today as a follow-up to a meeting or the other last session we had. Just another good opportunity for us to share, to compare, and also to see how we could address the issue of SMEs, and especially towards today's theme of trying to address partnerships on risk-informed SMEs. I'm a director in charge of business environment and private sector development in the State Department of Industrialization. And the State Department of Industrialization, if I just start to give you a small preview of what we do, we are mandated to create an enabling and conducive environment for development of trade and industry sectors in Kenya. And in particular, we look at how we could support industrial policy and planning. We address issues of SME policy, and in particular, and for the interest of our discussions today, we have recently finalized the Kenya Micro and Small Enterprise Policy, which is an update of the MSE policy of 2005, where we had measures to see how we could support the SME sector. As a mandate also, we look at SME financing policy. And here in particular, as a ministry, we have 3 implementing agencies that support SMEs with funding: Kenya Industrial Estates, Kenya Industrial Corporation and Development Corporation, ICDC. We also have Industrial Development Bank Capital that also supports SMEs. We also are very and aggressively, you may have realized recently, right from the president, promoting the Buy Kenya, Build Kenya policy and strategy. We also promote standardization in industry and quality control. And here our Kenya Bureau of Standards takes the leads, and of late we are trying to reach out and focus a lot with SMEs to standardize and improve on their products. We also promote and development of micro and small enterprises, where we have the Micro and Small Enterprise Authority leading in that area, a home for SMEs, and we also register associations. We also are involved in promotion and facilitation of domestic and foreign investments. And here we have the Kenya Investment Authority, an agency leading in that area. And maybe to the SMEs on the house, please use that facility. A lot of times you think it's just for foreign investors. It's for all investors in Kenya. We also have a one-stop center there where you can get all regulatory services you'd want for a startup or to start your business. We also deal with promotion and oversight of special economic zones and industrial parks. Under us, we have the Export Processing Zones Authority. And to the SMEs, we also have a portion for SMEs who are keen on exporting. So that's a facility available for you to use also. We have the Kenya Property Rights Policy as a mandate. And here we have the Kenya Industrial Property Institute, KIPI, involved in protection of intellectual property. We also have business innovation and incubation. And here we have Kenya Industrial Estate supporting us on that. And we also have Kenya Industrial Research and Development Institute, agencies within state corporations within the ministry to help in that aspect. So to what I normally do as a director in charge of private sector development, I'm involved in supporting on how we could improve the ease and cost of doing business. Many a times we link the State Department with the private sector for whom we are trying to support for an enabling environment. And I have, like had been mentioned by Wangeshi, enough experience in the trade and industry sectors. And I'm looking forward to the deliberations today to further enhance the sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wangeshi, for the opening remarks. And indeed, we welcome Dr. Njoki and Mr. Odua. So this is going to be a very interesting session. And without further ado, we would really want to deep dive into our question and answer session for today. And we will want to really encourage all the participants to give us their questions. Give us your questions through the chat box. We have our two things on outreach and knowledge for resilience, and also for partnering for risk-informed SMEs. So to begin our question and answer session, I hand over to Dr. Njoki Mwarumba around the theme of outreach and knowledge for resilience. So please, to the participants, feel free to give us your questions that we will address with Dr. Njoki this afternoon around the theme of outreach and knowledge for resilience. Over to you, Dr. Njoki.
Thank you very much, Mudhoni. I do appreciate the opportunity to begin a conversation on outreach and knowledge. And I would like to give you my context. My context is certainly one that absolutely appreciates the value that the practitioners bring, because that is ideally what advises and what instructs the work that we do as in the field of academia. So to go ahead, I will, for the next 4 to 5 minutes, talk about a few points that I think are very central based on data that is more global data, but also increasingly data that is coming from the continent, coming from the country on disaster outreach and knowledge, okay? So the first point that I would like to put forth is that we really do see that for the most part, organizations like yours and even bigger institutions tend to approach disasters as if disasters are one-off, as if they are accidents, right? They're not, like, as if they are not expected to happen. And we understand that the way in which we think is the same way in which we strategize. So to that extent, we really do need to begin to question our thinking and ask ourselves whether we are actually mainstreaming disasters as part of our everyday living at all levels, personal and private, at micro levels, with our families, with our communities, with our businesses, with the places that we worship, with the places that we visit. We need to mainstream and understand that disasters, as predicted by data from multiple scientists, right, as well as multiple social scientists, are predicted to continue to trend and not only to increase in their frequency, okay, but also in their impact. So we will continue to see frequent disasters. We will also continue to see an intensity in our disasters. So if that is the case, what do? We need to understand that our businesses, right, are about people. We are dealing with people. Even if you're dealing in the manufacturing industry where you're putting forward products, there is always a service component. So there has been historically great emphasis that is put on the economic, engineering, industrial side. We need to understand the social science component, because we are dealing with people, whether it is your employer, your employees, your vendors, your clients. Those are people. You need to understand how it is their understanding of disasters, which advises their reaction or proaction to disasters, how that is bound to influence your business outcomes. That data is out there, is available, and if it is not available to you immediately, that is also data that you can actually be part of developing. And that brings me to the second point: data-driven decision making. Regardless the size of your business, that is an entity which you have control in. What is data? Data is about your business, how you work, who you work with, what the outcomes are, what those patterns are, and being able to use that data to make your decisions. Therefore, you can always go back, right, and reference that data for future decision making. The current situation that we're in with a pandemic is a very outlier type of event. And my hope is that you have been able still to keep your data, how your business is going, what is impacting it, because that needs to become sooner rather than later part of your resilience building approach. The next point that I would like for you to also consider is that there is a social vulnerability component and an economic vulnerability component to disasters, but disasters are not always what happens to us. We can see historically, from the time people lived in caves to hunting and gathering, to date, people develop resilient systems. So we can be proactive and active in disasters. It's not just what happens to us. We have the capacity, we have social capacities, we have economic capacities, and those we need to leverage so that we can build our resilience and we can have more sustainable businesses as well. The next point I would like to touch on as I come into my concluding remarks is on developing plans and implementing them. It is one thing to have a plan and to have it collecting dust somewhere in a corner as evidence that you have a plan. It's another thing to actually practice what it is that you have set out in your plan, your standard operating procedures, for example. How do you do this? Meetings with your employers, meeting with your employees, with your vendors, communicating about redundancy, backup plans. That is critically important. Having functional exercises, not just drills where you go and meet at a pre-designated place, but a deeper dive into what if X happened. Would you be in a position to have our supplies ready? Okay, would you be in a position to continue businesses? How would you restructure your business if you had to telecommute, which is something that we are seeing happening now a lot, where people have to work because of social distancing for far? How would you restructure your business? How would you scale up or scale down? Okay, how do you communicate with your clients? All those are factors which bring me into the next concluding remark, which encapsulates what it is that we are trying to address: business continuity planning. Data indicates that majority small businesses really tend to struggle and not survive heavy disaster and catastrophic impact. Okay, so with that in mind, what is it that you can do? What is it that you can come together and coalesce around with smaller businesses, with the government, with nonprofit organizations, to create a robust system so that your disaster continuity planning excuse me, is robust, is able to be resilient when you're buffeted in a disaster. And I put it to you that one of the biggest challenges that we have in our field is that people think response planning. When you mention disasters, most people immediately switch to fire engines, to the police, to the ambulance. The conversation here is beyond just that response phase. I call upon you to really consider systems thinking, where you're thinking beyond that one phase. You're thinking about an all-around cyclical blue sky when days are happy and gray sky when things are heavy and there's a crisis. You need to consider that we need to think through, plan through, implement, and actualize disaster planning, mitigation, preparedness at every opportunity. We need to be analyzing, seeking solutions, implementing, testing, maintaining, more analysis, repeat the cycle. So I do come here to also discuss that is something that as knowledge, as a knowledge base, that is where we need to start. And it is from that advised knowledge base that we can then reach out to the people that we work with. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Njoki. I have actually put off my video because I realize that I'm about to be kicked out of the system, so please bear with me. Dr. Njoki, that has really started our conversation, really, that disaster risk management needs to be based on an understanding of disaster risk in all its dimensions. So I'm going to invite Stephen Odua to continue with this discussion, and still encourage all the participants, please give us your questions. We have our two experts here today to help us really unpack this whole discussion around building the resilience of SMEs. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Modoni, and thank you very much, Njoki. Indeed, I want to build from what you have actually stated in your remarks. One is true that even at government level, we had initially individual risk mitigation measures. Just to take an example of MSEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises as an example. The first part of it, we are looking at SMEs are considered risk businesses, just from the word go. How do we mitigate the issue of risk businesses or the perception on risk businesses that was there? And one of the initiatives done not too long ago by government is to introduce credit reference bureaus to try and help on aspects of profiling or managing at least the risk of the owners, especially for SMEs and single owner businesses. Then the other issue came in, okay, why is profiling of risk important for SMEs? One is so that we could help them reduce the aspect of credit. So the other issue then came in is how then can we build on reducing the risk for SMEs with regard to them getting high credit, which ultimately then means they are less competitive, and then was a huge contributor to the high mortality rate that we used to see within SMEs, or was the case before. So one of the key measures we have now decided to change, and to the point Njoki has made, is to try and look at a more integrated approach. So that as we are looking at the risk profiling of an SME as an example, you want to look at all factors or all situations that could create a challenge with the SME. So based on that, we have now reconfigured our micro and small enterprise policy, where one of the key areas we are putting as intervention areas is we want to develop effective risk mitigations, adaptations, and coping mechanisms against hazards posing shocks in MSEs. I think, as Njoki has alluded to, the COVID-19 has been a wake-up call for many of us, and especially for the MSE sector, where we see that those that had measures in place, especially those that were quick to adapt to the situation. A case in example is the textile farms, those that quickly adapted to making masks as a mitigation measure, actually managed to stay afloat, and if anything, have been able to maintain or grow their business trajectory without a fall down, as it were. So identification of hazards and risk factors becomes very critical, and we want that to be now as part of the day-to-day planning for SMEs as they continue. Then there's also importance of undertaking risk analysis and risk evaluations. And here we also, just to reemphasize, within the systems thinking, we want to look at it in a 360-degree approach, where you are looking at all aspects. And in government now, we are applying an integration approach, where we are looking at if there's a shock, like there's a closure of our airports or our ports, what then do we deal with regard to the movement of goods and services alone? What measures do we put in place? And the same goes into a business. How do you develop a multi-hazard and multi-sectoral risk reduction and risk mitigation plan, which then would help in terms of addressing shocks? And now, as the saying goes, the only change that is constant is the change itself. Nothing is constant. So we are increasingly adhering to the fact that it could be aspects of climate change, it could be aspects of global economic depression, and recently it is COVID. How do we position ourselves first to stay on float, to grow, and as it says, where there are disasters, opportunities also therein lie. So we want to develop and roll out a capacity building program where we'll be putting or training SMEs on risk management and disaster preparedness. This will go along with holding regular policy dialogues so that both at the county and national level, so that through these processes, we can be able to, one, engage with SMEs that are risk informed, but particularly then we can be able to see their growth, graduation, and even their development into huge multinationals, not only addressing the regional market, but also the global market. So I'll stop for now. You can see there are quite a number of questions. We can build our discussions around the questions. Thank you, and over to you, Muthoni.
Thank you so much, Mr. Odua, and we are definitely receiving questions from you, and we continue to encourage our participants to come forward with questions so that we really do take advantage of these two experts who have very kindly accepted to be with us this afternoon. So, Dr. Njoki, I have two questions for you. The first one is, where can SMEs access case studies to learn how resilient practices have been built by SMEs in other parts of the world? That's the first question, really. Where can SMEs access studies to learn how resilient practices have been built by SMEs in other parts of the world? The second question is it possible that Dr. Njoki and experts in the disaster management field develop a workbook with tools and guidelines for SMEs? Two really, really good questions. Over to you, Dr. Njoki.
Thank you very much. These questions are actually quite central to part of the reason why this platform has been organized by IIA, and why, in partnership with Strathmore, we will be looking to start the process of developing what it is these gaps are. So what these two questions already do for us is give us a mandate to begin, in partnership with the government. Stephen Odua is here, in partnership with you, right? And when I say you, I mean the people in the field, the micro and small business owners, right? We need to begin to have that coalition that actually supports the development of this knowledge. Admittedly, I do not know off the top of my head right now, but I can always get back with you on where a repository exists just as of right now of case studies. Here's one thing I do know. I do know, for example, that Strathmore is very focused on teaching using the case study method, where we either develop or co-create case studies as a central piece of our teaching component when it comes to communicate within the business school arena. So this is something that will be available at such a time when the course comes up in June. But beyond that, right? I call upon you to begin developing your own case study. We are a very oral centered society, which is understood, but we also need, for posterity and also for resilience building, to be the ones who begin to put our case studies together and use that as the gold that they are. Why do I emphasize that? I emphasize that because a lot of the data in my field is very Eurocentric. Okay, by Eurocentric, I do mean it is coming in from European countries, it's coming in from the Americas as well. We have not done as good a job ourselves as scholars or even as people doing the actual practitioner work in developing what these two questions ask me and ask my colleague here, which is developing a central contextualized case studies and contextualized standard operating procedures or response frameworks, so that we can actually leverage those directly, not just at top national level frameworks, but at at the level where people are actually applying them. I can also say that having a workbook is important. But what I need you to understand is that even if you have a standard operating procedure or you have a disaster framework for your business, it is only that. It is only a framework. It is only a backbone. Okay? The fleshing and the coming together of what else goes around that is something that you yourself have to put in, right? It is not as prescriptive, because what we do know in my field is that no disaster is like the other. One flooding event is not like the next flooding event. The systems have changed. The environment has changed. So when you have the baseline understanding and knowledge, you can then take your framework, your existing skeleton, your existing operations, for example, or your existing business continuity plan. And then you can put in the additional data that says, whenever we got hit by a pandemic, right? In the year 2020 into 2021, this is what we did. What was a success? What was a failure? Brings me to my next point. We have got to actually learn from our failures. And by that, I mean really take them in, take them apart, disaggregate bit by bit what it is that led to that failure, and actually document and learn from it and value it, right? As part of learning, people tend to discard, right? Or move on to something else. People need to sit in failure and understand, especially with your businesses, what was it that I did or my vendor was unable to do? Was it a supply chain problem? What is it that we can do with local innovation rather than depending on Dubai or China or wherever else that our products are coming from? What other value chain decisions can we make, for example, that are local and that can be amplified? You need to be making these plans long before the next pandemic, long before the next flooding season, long before an earthquake hits. Stephen Odua very aptly said, what happens when our ports cannot be accessible? Our airport is not accessible. We have got to use our minds to think about the impossibilities and then see how it is that we can begin to slowly, not just think, but also plan for those eventualities. Because the often repeated reality of disaster management is that with disasters, it's not a matter of if they will happen, you're guaranteed. You are guaranteed, right, that they will happen and they are likely to impact you at all levels, right? Personal, community, your business, national. So we need to be planning and thinking ahead about how it is we can actualize those. So you're giving us matching orders when you talk about developing case studies. You're giving us matching orders when you're talking about developing frameworks. But I will not be surprised just by listening to Mr. Stephen Odua that there could be some of this material existing somewhere that it has already being developed and leveraged. So the question therefore becomes, and my challenge to you is this: you are in the right place here with us today, with IIA, but who in our team here, or who do we need to reach out to that is already in the process of developing these frameworks? When it comes to knowledge development, the question should always be, who else has done this? How have they done it? Can I take it and adapt it to my existence? Once you answer those questions, then you can make a determination of, do I need to start from scratch, or do I need to build on what someone else has done? So I will stop there and invite Mr. Odua, who is very familiar and very well versed, if I can do that, to either respond to the same, or we can move on to the next question, depending on what our moderator thinks. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Njoki. Indeed, I want to concur with you. Probably we don't have at the moment a single depository where we have case studies. But I just want to share with everybody around. We as government introduced a project. It was called the Micro and Small Enterprise Competitiveness Project. This was way back in the year 2005. And one of the components of that project, which was World Bank sponsored, was to see how we could train universities, local universities, in developing local case studies and also teaching them, as it were. We realized, and I'm sure the person who raised that question would relate more with a local business in terms of a case study, probably more easier than General Motors in the US, as an example. Many a times would say, well, maybe the situations are different, the environment is a bit different. But through that program, which we had with the World Bank, 3 universities basically signed up. One is Strathmore University, as it were, and we also had Kenyatta University, and the third was Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. So the program enabled them to be able to link up with the Global Schools Business Network, mainly the network of business schools internationally. They got lecturers from Harvard who could come and teach them. They also had they also went there. Those links also with African universities, Nigeria, UAE, South Africa. And indeed, I believe that through that interaction, Strathmore Business School was actually established and has grown over the years with regard to addressing SME issues specifically within the business environment. So yes, I know there is a depository of case studies in Strathmore Business School. I'm sure over the years that has been developing. I know the same with JKUAT and also Kenyatta University. As the project is coming to a close, we were also signing up other universities, especially the business schools. And Strathmore then, Kenyatta and JKUAT were then being used as trainers of trainers so that we could develop case studies. And it was as simple as a business of, or rather it could, some of the case studies could be some businesses like as starting a salon, as an example. So it was so practical oriented, where then you can relate to the various challenges involved. So yes, that is already within our business schools. Maybe updating and whether it's ongoing, I could leave that for Dr. Njoki to maybe elaborate further as persons within the academia. But it's something government partnered with the universities to see how we can come in. With regard to the handbook, yes, handbooks do help. I know we have, as a ministry, done various handbooks. For example, handbook for importing and exporting. So if you want to import, what are the regulations? What are the requirements? If you're exporting, which are the institutions? So those are available in certain specific areas. But in terms of risk management, our approach is a bit different now. We have realized that, and I think Njoki in an earlier response to the question also alluded to it, risks are varying. Business needs have become very varying. Before, we used to have supply-driven training, for example. We could say, let's train you on managing your funds. Let's train you on marketing. But you've realized that despite that, we are not seeing that exponential growth, as it were, in the SMEs. So the approach we are using, and we have a new program we are starting with as a ministry, the Kenya Industry and Entrepreneurship Project, is where we want to have, we go to a specific SME and we diagnose exactly what are your challenges as an SME, so that from there we are coming up with demand-driven solutions. So that the handbook, just coming back to the point, is useful, but as Njoki says, we need to, and that's where the risk management planning is important. We need to look at what specifically would be your solution in the case of a risk. And just like we have said in examples here, those that were already IT related, the Glovos, the Uber Bytes, they managed to stay afloat despite many SMEs coming down. So we are now encouraging that. But yes, handbooks are things that we could also look at on general terms. Thank you. And over to you, Mudhani.
Thank you so much, Mr. Odua. I have, Stephen, I'll have two questions for you, but before I come to you, I just wanted to give Dr. Njoki a chance, if she would want to address that question around the knowledge management aspects that you have raised, or if we go on first to Stephen and then come back to you, Dr. Njoki. Would you want to take that on, or do we move on to Dr. Stephen? Over to you, Njoki.
I will read the question, and so for now, I will pass that on to Stephen Odua, and then I will support the response. Thank you.
Okay, Njoki, thank you so much for that. So, Stephen, we have two questions for you. And this actually, the first question builds from your presentation on the session last week, the dialogue series on investing in disaster risk for resilience. And the question is, from the last session, you mentioned the government is stepping up on support to innovation under a World Bank funded project. Is this only geared towards technology innovations, or are we going to see support for other innovations like agriculture? Will we see subsidies or support through KIRDI? So for clarity, I'll just repeat that question because it is quite lengthy. You mentioned the government is stepping up on support to innovation under a World Bank funded project. Is this only geared towards technology innovations, or are we going to see support from other innovations like agriculture? And will we see subsidies or support through KIRDI? That's the first part of that question. As I said, it's lengthy. The second question is, as MSMEs and SMEs are very affected by the many licenses and taxes topped up by turnover tax, which adds to the losses. Is there a discussion happening in the SME roundtable around this? The environment is unfriendly. This really has to do with laws and policies around addressing risk. So over to you, Mr. Odua.
Thank you very much, Mudhani. Yes, indeed, just mentioned earlier, the government, through a World Bank project, which I've also alluded to a few minutes ago, is seeing how we can support innovative startups. We originally were looking at a gap. The gap was technology-oriented startups, those who are coming up with applications that are supporting businesses, are improving businesses as a service, or a good example is Uber. Many a times we'd look at the taxi itself as the business, but we forget that the taxi driver who is using the Uber app is actually paying some service fee. That service fee to the Uber, the app provider, is actually a business in itself. And that then transformed into digital-oriented businesses, e-commerce. So as government, we are now looking at that space on which are these specific startup innovators that are on board. And globally now, the focus is there in the sense that we know we have young talent, or talent available that could help in addressing some of these solutions, including what you're talking about, risks that companies are having. How do you mitigate them? And a lot of these solutions now are digital oriented. But then back to your question, it's not exclusively technology oriented. We are looking at any kind of innovation. But yes, the initial bias was to try and also address that gap, which was there. But like you see, government is slowly getting into that space. And I know as the community of innovators here, the issue of digital tax is still quite a discussion we are having, both as government and yourselves as practitioners or the sector, as it were. So the answer is not that exclusively. With regard to whether and how we undertake it, component one is looking at strengthening the innovation intermediaries. And here the intermediaries, like you've rightfully alluded to in your question, includes Kirdi. We are also looking at people like Andela, who are helping startups come up with skills of writing programs. And in fact, that is becoming now quite a common feature. So we are looking at the entire ecosystem with regard to the intermediaries. And that could also include the innovation hubs. It could also include various accelerators and incubators, as it were. So with that, what our program is trying to do is to support their sustainability. Again, as they're developing, and we are going to go again through a diagnostics approach to them. Once you've identified the ones we'll be working with, which will be done competitively, we want to do a diagnostics on what is the challenges they're having within the organization, but specifically to address sustainability and also handle issues of risk within their operations, how to mitigate that. So through that process, we are trying to see how we could enhance their sustainability, if it means coming up with more robust models. That is what we are supporting. And for that, we'll be giving grants. Similarly, the startups themselves, will also be training them, we'll also be supporting them, and those will be through grants. So in a way, yes, we don't want to use the word subsidies, because we are definitely not going to disrupt the business through those that will be benefiting from that support, but just something to support them for continuity, for sustainability, and particularly to be able to manage risk. So that is that aspect of the question. With regard to the taxes, yes, this is a conversation we are continuously having, both at the SME roundtable and also in government. Of course, we also trying to see how we can balance revenues with the taxes also. So turnover tax, yeah, I think it was one means was to how do we make it easy. So turnover tax was to try and see how we can make it easier for SMEs to be able then to file their returns. But indeed, we are also looking at how we can reduce the aspects of costs. We came up with a single business license to try and address those kind of issues. Recently, you may have seen, we have scrapped stamp duty fees. We have scrapped NEMA fees. So there's work in progress towards that. And of course, there's talk that Kenya is one of the highly taxed countries. But yes, there's work in progress on that. So it's still a conversation that you're having. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And I do have another question for you. But before I go into that question, I just wanted to see if you could very quickly give us some more information or even a bit of background for the sake of our participants about the Kenya Industry and Entrepreneurship Project. If we could just maybe take just 2 or 3 minutes to quickly walk us through that, then I will come to you with the other question that's addressed to you. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank you, Mudhoni. Like I'd mentioned to you, increasingly Kenya is being considered an innovation destination in terms of an area you're likely to get innovators. and also generally about having a strong entrepreneurship culture. You remember way back the second visit by President Obama when he was coming to open the entrepreneurship conference in Kenya. It is the realization that Kenyans have that ability, that capability within ourselves. However, we don't, or we are saying that that potential has not really been exploited to the potential that would like it to have and be a game changer with regard to our economic development. So through these projects, initially looking at that as a gap, we were looking at how then can we address that gap of the innovation startups that are not operating with, that are not really considered as such within the economy. So the project is designed to increase productivity and innovativeness in select private sector firms. And how are we going to do this? We have 3 specific components. Component 1 is to see how we can strengthen the intermediaries within the ecosystem. And here, like I mentioned to you, we want to see how we can strengthen the incubators, the accelerators, the startups, the accelerators, the iHubs, to be able then to reach out more to the startups within their various programs. 2, we wanted to see within component 1, how can we create an industry startup linkage? Because we see many of our industries are still using traditional technology. And like we all know now, and you have seen the potential of mobile technology, if, for example, you could just use, a good example is how you can manage your transport fleet. You can see at any one time where your vehicle is through an app or through a facility within your industry. That will really help you reduce wastage, where drivers would go for their own rides. It would help you also in planning your transport arrangements, especially for big businesses, so that you can now be able to consolidate cargo that is going to one particular direction, so that really improves efficiencies. So the potential is there with the startups who can come up with the solutions, but 1, they may not be able to know how to approach the industry, and 2, the industry is also suspicious about them. So this industry startup linkage is to try and bridge that gap, so that within the environment, there's seamless interactions between the startups and the industries for solutions creation. A lot of the other approach being used by other countries is you come up with a challenge fund. So in the challenge fund, you just say, this is the challenges you are having as industry. Can we get solutions from startups? But as we want to introduce that part, then we also want to have an industry academia linkage also, because we know that we have innovations in academia, but many times the innovations that are in the academia don't get to be commercialized. What we see internationally is once you have an industry partnering with a university with a view of coming up with a solution, we see the solution getting more adapted and becoming more readily used or commercialized through that partnership. So we are trying to create that partnership also within the industry and the academia. Then we realize that the ones that are already operating in Kenya that are not able to, are not really being felt at the regional and international level, we have a sub-component called the international acceleration process. The job of that particular component is how can we expose our startups to resources internationally. It could be to the Silicon Valley. They can get mentors there. They can get venture capitalists there. They can be able to get various kind of resources that would support them as innovators, and especially technology innovators. So how can we have them exposed both regionally and internationally, so that we now can start exporting after developing this service both regionally and internationally? And like you already have seen in the recent press reports, Our diaspora remittances is one of our biggest source of revenue of foreign exchange into the country. We can build that even bigger by having our startups reach out or operate more globally, internationally. Lastly, the second component is SME linkages and upgrading. We know that SMEs actually, and it's becoming now common if you look at a place like Japan, where a vehicle like Toyota with 3,000 parts have equivalent SMEs specializing on one part to supply to Toyota as it was. Yeah. So can we have those kind of linkages where we have a big firm? It could be Safaricom, it could be Coca-Cola. As they develop the various flavors of soda, they have linkages with SMEs to provide them with the concentrates of mango, of pineapple. So we want to see of those SMEs already linked to lead farms, how can we then support them to grow? So that our support now in terms of the SME linkages, those that have been nominated by lead farms, we want to go through a diagnostic process, see what are the challenges that could embed them to grow even bigger, and then we support them in that respect. And component 3 is just on documenting the best case studies, like we said in government. Ours is just to pilot, and we have the private sector then adopt and run with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Odua. Indeed, there is appetite building around the topic of partnering for risk-informed SMEs. Before I go back to Stephen for an additional 2 questions, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Njoki, who would like to comment on some feedback from our multilateral partners in the UN system on the issue of SME resilience. Over to you, Dr. Njoki, for 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very informative, Mr. Odua, in addressing, what are the tangible opportunities that actually exist and that can be leveraged. I see a comment on Julius Kabubi, from Julius Kabubi, about the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, having just launched a booklet on reducing risk and building SMEs resilience to disasters. And thank you very much for sharing that link for that document. And I have 2 comments that I will then build on with regard to that document. The first one being that when you look at the basis of this document, right? It comes from, it has been developed from the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, 2015 to 2030. And this document is very central in helping us understand that at the international global level, the thinking and the commitment to disaster risk reduction is front and center. There are very specific plans that have been laid out and frameworks that actually exist within a time frame, right, that benchmark where it is we should be. Probably more at the national level, at the national level, where we should be. Now, why do I bring that up? I bring that up because majority of us have these cell phones that are smart, or we have computers that we have access to. What Julius has done is highlight for us a product that is out there that is available at the touch of a button. Between rides, in traffic, get back on here, read, generate knowledge. Look at documents such as the ones that Julius has posted and others that exist. Based on your business, look at global professional organizations that address, if you're in the hair business, if you are in the business of developing specific products, if you are in tourism, what is going on globally? What are the challenges? Do that work, that reading, that seeking of information, knowledge, right? Because in the process, you begin to either link those with your place of work or what it is that you're doing yourself, And you also learn, coming back to failure, learning about failure, you begin the process or continue the process of being able to mirror that which you are doing, right? And understanding, okay, what can I sustainably adopt, and what am I doing that can be adjusted based to this new learning, right? And how can I be the person that either leads this shift or disrupts the way business is going, right? So let us learn to access this information. I call upon consistently us to identify what our social capacities are. We have those capacities. We have access to information in unprecedented ways that was obviously not available 10, 15, 20 years down the line, right? So let us leverage information that way. Coming back to the document, the UNDRR document on SME resilience. And I will link this to a statement that I had made earlier with regard to contextualization. When you look at this document, it is very rich with information that we can take and contextualize for ourselves. However, the question is, why is the entire African continent not a contributor and not referenced directly, as far as I know, in this document? We have the closest reference is to the Caribbean. That is who we can probably align to the closest. But we also have data from and information from Mexico. We have information from the Americas, right? We also have information from countries like the Philippines. Why is there no African representation on a document like this? We will not begrudge the organization, right, for not representing the African continent. We still go in there and look at the information and the recommendations and realize, okay, what is it that's happening in the Caribbean? What is it that's happening in Mexico, for example, that is closer maybe to my framework that I can adopt, right? And then also, when you see that there's that gap, right, you should begin asking the questions why, and beginning to understand that we ourselves need to be partnering in the generation of the knowledge and the science. We tend to be very reticent in participating in data sharing because of trust issues and confidentiality and proprietary information. I understand that, but to the best possible opportunities or the best possible ways in which we can do this, we need to be the ones generating the document and participating, right, in some of these studies and in generating this knowledge, so that when it comes to comparative analysis with what is going on in the world, and more importantly, resource allocation, whether it's at a global, regional, national level, then we are doing that, again, coming back to a tenet that I had shared earlier, from a place that is informed by data. So let us not be too reticent or untrusting. Let us form coalitions that we can keep accountable, right? Whether it's professional organizations that we create or join, that can in turn therefore participate and protect our data, and whether the data is generated anonymously, but we know that is data that is relevant and contextualized and therefore applicable, because that's the same data that is being used to allocate resources. So that is the comment that I wanted to make with regard to that. What is interesting too about this UNDRR document is that some of what we are discussing here, some of what you are asking for, the case studies, the operational frameworks, are actually also discussed in that document, right? They talk about how it is you can leverage this information, how you can get this information, how you can coalesce, right, around formalized organizations to actually generate, but also benefit by training and practicing and using the economies of scale to access information, to access operations and resources. the document also talks about the importance of having a multi-hazard scenario planning. That is something that I would like to quickly touch on. We do not have the benefit of just dealing with one disaster at a time, cleaning it up and packing it away. I said that there's going to be an increase. We're going to see an increase in disasters and an increase in the intensity and impact. So it almost feels like we are in a chronic state of disaster response and disaster recovery, so that you never really are recovered enough, right, to be able to mitigate and start planning for the next one. So also understanding that information, that yes, you should expect in your business that you will be dealing with disaster response or recovery in one shape or another. And it's not only going to affect you, the economic component, but there's also, again, the social component that I am emphasizing, because plans actually are about people, okay? So understanding people and making sure that people have that awareness. Your clients know, right, that these are your plans in case we have an event, in case we run out of power, like, or in case we have some flooding. This is what we will move to. Keeping your clients, your customers engaged and involved is part of the mainstreaming of disasters, and giving them solutions, being solution oriented, telling them, for example, if we are not able to meet your expectations at such and such a point, what we can assure you is that within a 1 week, 2 week time period, we will be able to meet your demands. And the reason you can tell them that for a fact is because you have already done your homework and sought alternative supply sources and signed memorandums of understanding and you have whatever it takes that is legal, that is able to mandate that organization is or that supplier is still able to meet your supplies at such a time as when you have a challenging event. So there's multiple practices out there. There's things that you yourselves have done, right, to survive. Because when we look at the data that has come back from the last engagement that we had, we can see that there's that there's a significant enough number of businesses that have actually had some positive outcomes from the current pandemic that we have. So it's identifying those, sharing those best practices, and actually seeing how you can implement them for what it is that you do. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Njoki. Indeed, well articulated, and it really hammers on the discussion that we had from last week around the importance of best practices in building the capacity of our SMEs. Allow me now to bring Stephen Odua back. Stephen, we have two questions for you. I will start with the first question because they're not related. It says, you mentioned about the capacity building program rolled out at the national and the county levels. And the person who is asking this question is concerned that how will these programs, how will the rollout be accessed at the counties? Or how are you ensuring a maximum reach to all? And for clarity, I just repeat that. In the planned capacity building program that will be rolled out in the national and the county levels, how will you ensure that it really reaches out to all the counties? Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you very much. I think it was Nyadundo for that question. Maybe I'll start by saying that as a function of industry is actually regarded as a national function within the constitution, which means that as a ministry, we have offices at the county level, manned by county industrial development officers. So already we have, as a ministry, a presence in the counties. We also have, as a part of the Micro and Small Enterprise Authority, what we are calling the enterprise development officers, who also are within the counties, but again, as part of MSEA, which is an agency at the national level. So that is one outreach area we are looking at in terms of reaching out to the counties. Number two, we are actually finalizing a joint working collaboration arrangement between the national and the county government, especially with regard to industry and trade-related matters. Trade, on the other hand, was devolved, so trade officers operate independently, just like health officers in the various counties. So that's one small distinction and one area we are leveraging on with regard to supporting the SMEs. Secondly, and especially to the innovation startups, we have a very strong partnership with the Association of Enablers and SMEs in Kenya, ASEC. ASEC is an association which has been recently formed. We encouraged them, as specifically the startups, to try and come up with such a framework, primarily because the issue of startups, like I said earlier on, within the bigger private sector organizations was not at that time easily understood. Like when many a times I do ask people, is the Uber application a business or not? Many at times you'll find people not answering immediately because the thinking is that, hey, how is it a business? More often than not, you think about the taxi driver himself as a business and not the app. So because of that, we encourage them. And this ASEC is registering innovation hubs all over the country. So as a project, we are actually supporting the strengthening of that organization so that it could also be a mouthpiece or an entry point for us to be able to reach out to the counties. We're also working very closely with the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, with the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, and also with the Chamber, Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, who in themselves as private sector organizations have chapters in the county. So that's one way that we are using and all those channels to be able to reach out. But anyway, as we will be launching, as we open up the programs, especially a lot of them will be called for applications. We'll also go live in terms of, like when we are launching the SME linkages and upgrading program, KIEP 250 plus. We launched it during the Africa Industrialization Day. There we had live coverage by Nation TV. Prior to that, we had press coverage just for the day and also for the launch. So we are using various methods to reach out to the counties. But indeed, yeah, we know the ecosystem is strong in Kenya, in Nairobi, but just developing in most of the counties. I don't know, Njoki, whether I go to the Mudhoni, whether I go to the second question or.
No, not yet, Stephen, but thank you so much for that. That's definitely reassuring about the inclusivity aspects in terms of the rollout of the capacity building program. So the second question was, our participant would really want you to explain the link between the startups and the MSMEs in view of the proposed startup bill that is being fronted by one of the senators in Parliament. So to really the link between the startups and the MSMEs in view of the proposed startup bill that is being fronted by one of our distinguished senators in Parliament. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mudhoni. And indeed, the question is a very important one. One, if I go to the bill was also trying to address what I've just mentioned in terms of that gap that we are slowly trying to see how we can address in government, and what the program I told you about is trying to address. But if you look at what are the objects of the startup bill being proposed by our Honorable Senator of Nairobi, it is to provide a framework to encourage growth and sustainable technology development and new entrepreneurship employment. Is specifically focusing on the technology-oriented startups. Again, very close to the first question, are we in our project addressing only that section? For us, we are looking at startups as part of the broader SME ecosystem. Why that is critical and where the SME policy comes in is that within the SME policy, we are looking at skills development, which probably also fits quite closely with the bill. But the startup bill is more focused on establishment of incubation programs. What are they? How can we register them? How can we identify and register the startups? What are the eligibility aspects of incubation? It's actually focusing and developing a framework for developing those startups in terms of incubation, how you could bring in aspects of credit guarantee schemes within the startup ecosystem, come up with training and capacity building, but in particular, physical incentives to support that startup ecosystem. But for the MSME bill, the MSE policy, we have realized, or now we are defining startups as part of that ecosystem, and then they will be liable, or they'll be able to be developed alongside other SMEs with regard to enhancing the entrepreneurship culture, with regard to access to domestic and export markets. The bill by Honorable Sakaja probably is not looking at aspects of how can we export that product or service from the startups. We are also looking at issues of affordable finance programs for them, and a lot of issues that we take for granted is infrastructure for the SMEs. You see within the trade, a lot of counties now are at least opening for them areas for trade. The issue of the infrastructure where startups can operate is a critical factor for many of them. So in the event of the technology startups, where can you get workspaces for them? So we are looking, the MSC policy is looking at that particular aspect, but the other one was looking more on the incubation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for that. And we do not have any further questions from our distinguished participants, but we would definitely want to have the parting shot from our two experts who have really given us so much information to process. And as we wrap our heads around the topic of resilience, more so at a time when we have seen the effects of the pandemic on our lives and livelihoods. I would like to just take this opportunity to bring back Dr. Njoki for 5 minutes for her parting shot, after which I will also invite Mr. Odua for a 5 minutes of his parting shot. Thank you so much, and over to you, Njoki.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this meeting of the minds. And thank you for the opportunity, Mudhoni, for the parting shot. I would like to take this opportunity, as Mudhoni mentioned, to obviously remind us, not that we need to be reminded, but just to remind us about the unprecedented times that we are living in. I call them unprecedented, not because we did not know that a pandemic was a possibility, but unprecedented because the plans that we said we had in place, right, are finally really being tested. And we know globally how this is turning out. I will give you an example. The United States of America was actually the leading country based on a global health indicator model for the country most and best prepared to respond to a pandemic. We know how that has turned out. Why? Is it that we as a country are indicating that the US is best prepared, okay, and leading on 4 of the 5 indicators, yet we know how the turnout has been? There's conversations that are going to be had research papers that are going to come out long after the pandemic, trying to help us understand where this country has been. We know there has been a failure in actually taking up and implementing a nationally cohesive approach. We know that some of the consequences are a result of the decisions that we made as a country that impacted the political climate of the country, okay? We also know that part of the reason that this country, which is supposedly the strongest economic country globally, right? We know that the relationship that this country has had with foreign governments, with other partners, has not necessarily been very robust. So the question becomes, how does that translate to us as SMEs and as micro enterprises as well? It reminds us, it takes us back to data. What are we measuring? What are the metrics that we are taking into place? My commendation to us is that we really heavily need to bring in the social component, understanding people, understanding how people respond, understanding, therefore, that we as an industry need to respond and understand and use this data to make these decisions. Coming back to the pandemic, one of the data points from the research, from the poll questions that we got last time we were together, that asked the question about the extent to which COVID-19 has negatively impacted and disrupted people's businesses, 52% said significantly, okay? Significantly. So we need to understand how the other component, right, is doing, the component that says they have not very significantly been impacted. That is a rich resource that can be used to inform and support those that are in the 52% with, at a minimum, knowledge on how it is they are surviving, okay, the impact. As a business owner, a lot of us generally that are not directly involved in the world of epidemiology or understanding pandemics have been forced to link into and learn about the reality of this disease, okay? So if you are not doing that, I encourage you to do that, because again, this is a reality that is going to be with us for not just months to come, but years to come. We are still in the response phase. We have not even begun the recovery phase. We have vaccines, but how do you overlay the information and the progression of this disease with information about what your business structures should be and what it is you can do, right, to continue in the process of being able to withstand the ongoing shocks and ongoing projected impacts? And also remember that our regular seasonal disasters are not bowing down to the pandemic, but will also be coming alongside. So how are you preparing for that? How are you creating robust systems so that you're able to deal with that reality? So it's important for us to continue to develop and adapt to new information. And in this case, the information that we have is around pandemics, how they behave, right? And the impacts that they have on people. So I do encourage you to form coalitions, to form thinking groups, to bring in the world of academia, but also to be the ones who generate knowledge alongside academia, because these institutions are there to work in partnership, right, with the people that they are serving. It should not be just a continuation of the White Tower experience where academia is out there, all these universities are out there. The outreach connection, the building of bridges, and I say that conscious of the use of bridges, but the building of bridges that are actually walkable bridges, that people that can walk that bridge, people that can ride a bicycle, a motorcycle, a car can be there, meaning all levels of access are granted and supported, so that we don't sit here and talk about global, national, macro level, and we are not really strictly addressing the micro SME, which we do know that is very significant in creating employment and keeping the economy of the country running. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Njoki, for that parting shot. Ladies and gentlemen, we agreed that we are going to tackle all the questions. And Stephen, I have to give you one last question before you give your parting shot. We have one of our participants who is wondering what the government will kindly the participant is asking if the government has a stimulus package for credit for startup in the area of mining. Stevie, as you tackle that question for us, we will be grateful to get your parting shot. Over to you for the next 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ndoni, and also thanks, I think it's Terry on that question. Indeed, the good news about the mining sector is now we have a mining policy where besides looking at aspects of royalties, I know it's a big challenge within that industry where aspects of royalties within the mining area comes into being. But that now has clearly been defined and structured within the mining policy. It also has incorporated aspects of training, especially artisanal miners or artisanal artisans who are in the mining industry, helping them understand issues of risks of environment, helping them understand how the risks of some of the chemicals they use, especially mercury, etc., etc. But generally, in course, your question is specifically to credit, they fit very well within the credit guarantee scheme that the government has recently introduced in partnership with the private sector. What government has done, we have put aside 5 billion as government and requested the private sector banks to also put in 5 billion, which then would be used to support various SMEs. This is all across to be able then to access credit at reasonably affordable rates, because a lot of the challenge currently is without guarantee of returns, especially for SMEs, the cost of credit becomes very high. So that's a partnership that we have engaged as government to see how we can address that. And that, Terry, cuts across all sectors. So you could access there with regard to the mining industry. So in terms of my parting shots, I just want to start by saying that internationally now, given that we are operating in one global economy, everybody is looking at how can we have partnerships. In the recent past, you may have noted, you'll find that various continents want to have engagements with Africa. You'll see Europe having meetings with Africa. You will find China having meetings with Africa. You will find India as a country, as huge as it is, also reaching out to Africa. Initially, it's on aspects of trade. But importantly, we are saying that we need to look at various aspects and how we can collaborate as various partners within addressing aspects of the pandemic. Indeed, we have to start planning for various aspects of pandemics. In Kenya alone, if we just give an example, for the last 2 years, we started with a drought. We came in with the locust issue. Before we could recover, we were dealing with the issue of COVID. And if, as government, we left COVID to be a purely health issue, Let's take an example of, we said, okay, COVID is health related. Let us block or let us lock, do total lockdown so that there is no movement of goods and services. Would we be able to have survived as a country in terms of the economy? Would we be able to have survived as a country in terms of movement of essential services, the medicine, the food? So we have to have an integrated approach in trying to look at mitigating risks, as it were. So I think the new trend is that let us work together as various partners in various fields to address issues of risk or issues of partnerships, because that is the way to go. With technology now, I just want to reemphasize what Njokia said. We are now moving towards using data-informed decision-making. And that will be best addressed when you have and forge partnerships all across in various fields, in various, both at SME level, at sector level, at country level. And for us as Africa, we have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. So we're even partnering on business aspects as a continent. So partnerships is the way to go. And Wangeshi, thanks. This is a demonstration of how far we can go partnering together as you have done today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Odua, for that parting shot. We will now move on to we are getting closer to our final part of the program today. But before doing that, I would like us to revisit the issue of the poll. For those of us who are in the session last week, you do remember that we had a 10-minute poll. And this poll was put together by Strathmore University with the objective of providing information about the profile of the participants and SMEs interested in the topic of disaster risk and resilience. The poll was to also help gain insights to the type of learning needs for SMEs on disaster preparedness, mitigation, and management. And this, of course, will go towards development of a practical and more relevant learning program that meets the needs of SMEs. And finally, the poll was to highlight areas of focus as we prepare for the Dialogue 3 in the Dialogue Series with Invest in Africa, which will be looking at enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. So I will hand over now to Dr. Njoki, who will give us the outcome of the poll, and this should take around 5 minutes. Over to you, Dr. Njoki.
First, I would like to begin by thanking the people that were able to participate in this poll. It is in fact a great opportunity for us to showcase how it is that we can begin to build databases that advise the ways in which we move forward. So the reason that we had this poll at Strathmore University is so that we can use this information, right, to begin to give us a sense of where the needs are. Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity, Mudhoni, to actually really just touch on some of the focus areas on at a very general level, which I will do in about 2 to 3 minutes, and probably leave a minute or two for any further clarifying statement. So, one of the key questions that we asked was, to what extent has COVID-19 negatively impacted or disrupted your business? I addressed that in my previous parting statement, where I said 52% said significantly. Okay, so what do we do with that kind of data? We look at it and we ask ourselves, well, this looks good. It looks that majority of the people during the response phase of this disaster have been negatively impacted, right? But we're only at 52%. Therefore, that means that we have a 48 that is actually moving along, is able to do business. Two things. How do we capture the 48%, what it is they're doing? Can it be replicated? And not only can it be replicated, but as we continue with the shocks of the pandemic and our regular seasonal disasters that come our way and the off chance ones like the locust, how do we then prepare ourselves to be more resilient to those? So there's that aspect of learning. Then learning from failure, the 52%, which have not necessarily talked about failing, but that they have negatively been impacted. What are the impacts? How do we prioritize what it is that their needs are? And how does the government, right, which seems to just have quite a slew of programs, how do we make it accessible? I see a question from one of our participants who is asking, how do we get access to the credit? Wilson Owala asks a quick question about how they can apply for credit. So the credit is there. What is the bridge that we need to build between this credit and Wilson and his colleagues so that they are actually able to get this a tool that is a survival tool available to them? The other focus area that I would like to touch on is business continuity planning. From our data, we asked people, does your business have a business pre-disaster mitigation and preparedness plan? We asked, how often do you review the plan? And are your employers or employees aware of their role in the stipulated plan? I will make the statement that based on the feedback, right, a strong majority do not have a plan, 69%, right? When you look at how often people review the plan, about nearly 50% say they do so annually. But you want that number to be higher because, again, no disaster is like another. We are in a very dynamic environment. The actual review needs to happen commensurate to what the shocks are, okay? Are your employers and employees aware of their role as stipulated in the plan? Majority, 63%, do not know. So therefore, what that plan becomes is a piece of paper, a file sitting somewhere. If your employees are not informed, they are not aware of their role, then that limits you, right? As your business is going to be one where as the business is being impacted, is the same time you're trying to educate, inform, equip, and send out your employees, right, to making them aware to the disaster plan that you have had the entire time. Coming back to systems theory, my encouragement and the encouragement of my field and the research is that during blue sky days, during the season before you hit, right? That is the time to engage your partners, engage the government, engage the private sector, your own employees, your clients, engage them in what your disaster plan is so that when impact happens, the switch is smoother, right? This pandemic has taught us that. A lot of us have gone on to telecommuting where we are teaching, where we are doing businesses across a virtual space, right? For many, the learning curve was very, very sharp. We were forced to do that. For some, it was easier. Be the SME that actually has a shorter transition time before or right after impact, and your survivability is increased by your capacity to actually have a shorter transition period. One of the other questions that is a focus area that I would like to also address is one that Mr. Odua has very well articulated as well, and that Wilson also asked, has your business received funding from the government as part of the stimulus or economic package? This one is actually one that we really need to sit with. The response is that 93% have not received the stimulus or the support, but 7% have. So we have a lot of learning to do from the 7%. We have a lot of learning, again, to understand why is it, if there is a stimulus available, it has not been accessed by the people who are qualified. Are they not familiar with the process? Are they not familiar with the availability? Or why is it that, what is it about their decision making that is making them hesitant to apply for this assistance? Okay. And then finally, training. The need for training is quite strong. There are people who certainly did respond to us and talk about the need for training being front and center for them when it comes to understanding how they can have a business continuity plan, and how they can be able to be more resilient and be able to bounce back, right, after the disaster impact. So I will touch on that. I think I have gone over by a couple of minutes, but I hope, Modoni, that has been sufficient, and to the team as well. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Njoki. You actually did very well on time. You still had another 2 minutes. So I am just looking to see from our chat box if there is any messages or any comments to the poll, but I do not see any at the moment. So I will then, okay, go ahead, Dr. Njoki.
If I actually have 2 minutes, I would like to address one more point.
Sure, please go ahead.
Thank you. One of the questions that we also asked was, does your business have resource funding dedicated to disaster outcomes? This one was very telling. 90% do not have a financial resource for use in the event of a disaster. Disaster research tells us, right, that for every dollar, and I'm using dollars loosely here, but for every dollar that you spend, in the process of mitigating, meaning in advance thinking and strategizing and in implementing disaster resilience, right? For every dollar that you spend during the blue sky days, you will save during response and recovery at a minimum $7. And obviously again, the research is not representative necessarily of developing countries, but if in leading economic countries, that is the amount of money that you are capable of saving, I am convinced that we are able to save even more, right, in developing countries, right? So there is an economic imperative for us to actually invest in disaster risk reduction for the strategic sense that it makes for your business. Yes, there are many competing priorities. I need money for this. I need money for that. I need to implement this. But equally important, we need to understand that disaster risk resilience, building around a business continuity plan, is as important a budget item, okay, as your other resource demands. That needs to be allocated, whether it's through some level of insurance, whether it's creating and developing redundant systems, whether it's fortifying your business, protecting your data, creating alternative sources, and having a retainer business options with other business providers or service providers. That is very, very important. Or alternative forms of transportation, depending again on what your business is. So that number is one that calls us to question about, what is it that is making just 10% of the people that were represented here to have a fund, not an emergency fund, not a miscellaneous fund, but a disaster support financial backing system, regardless of what that looks like. Like I said, why is it that we only have 10%? Yet we know for a fact that disasters are going to happen. So I hope that this encourages you to begin to think, and not just think, right, but to actualize and operationalize business continuity planning. Disasters will happen, guaranteed. So there's need for us to actually invest in that kind of resilience. Thank you very much for the additional time.
No, thank you so much, Dr. Njoki, for that. This brings us to this almost close part of our program today. But before we do that, Invest in Africa committed to coming back to the questions that were raised to Mr. Jacob Flewilling from DFC during the dialogue discussion last week. So I will, on behalf of Invest in Africa, read out the responses that have been received from DFC. DFC received 3 questions. The first one of which was, what is your funding criteria? And I am going to read them out as verbatim and as we receive them from Mr. Jacob Flewilling. So DFC's funding criteria is as follows. DFC can provide debt, credit guarantees, political risk insurance, and or direct equity. The project sponsor or company must have been operational for at least 2 full calendar years. The project sponsor or company must have annual revenues greater than $2 million in at least one part of the last 2 years. The project company or special purpose vehicle must be majority owned and controlled by the private sector. The project sponsor must commit sufficient equity to the proposed transaction, and applicants should note that DFC will generally fund no more than 60% of the total project or transaction cost. Direct equity proposals must be for a proposed ownership interest by DFC for less than 30%, and DFC will not consider requests for acquisition financing, refinancing, and transactions solely for working capital or equipment or trade export finance. DFC prioritizes investments in low income and lower middle income countries. And for further information, you will visit the DFC website for information on eligibility. And I am certain that Invest in Africa will make available this link for the interested SMEs. The second question is, any support to the mining industry specifically for the startups? And the response from DFC is consistent with question 1 above. DFC does not typically provide financing for companies that have been operational for less than 2 years. In terms of the mining sector, the only mining projects that DFC is able to consider are those that are deemed to be critical minerals. The third question was about DFC support to developing countries. SMEs are minimal. Are there specific reasons why this is the case? Are there proposed solutions to scale up funding? I will read that question again for clarity. DFC support to developing countries, SMEs, seems minimal. Are there specific reasons why this is the case? Are there proposed solutions to scale up funding? And the response from DFC is, DFC support to SMEs in developing countries has been highly substantial and will continue to be so. Through the 2 times, and then DFC goes ahead to provide additional examples or cases where this support has been substantial. For example, through the 2X Women's Initiative alone, DFC has catalyzed more than $2 billion of private sector investment in projects that economically empower women in developing countries, often by expanding access to financing for women and entrepreneurs. And of course, for us who are in the dialogue series, we remember many other examples that Mr. Flewilling provided as cases of where DFC is providing support. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us now to the last part of our Ask the Expert session today, and I will hand over to Ms. Wangeshi Muriuki for that closing segment. Over to you, Wangeshi.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody, our distinguished panelists, our moderator, our SMEs present, our guests. I realize that we have quite a diverse audience this afternoon, and we've come to the end of our session this afternoon, and I just want to take this time on behalf of Invest in Africa to thank each one of you. I want to start by acknowledging our partners, first of all, our event partners, Strathmore University Business School, our collaborators, the Ministry of Industrialization and Trade, DFC, which is the US International Development Finance Corporation, ANDI, the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs, and the Kenya Private Sector Alliance and MasterCard, who are our partners working with us on this journey. I want to say a big thank you. To our esteemed panelists and experts, Dr. Njoki Mwarumba and Mr. Stephen Odua and Jacob in absentia, a very big thank you for kindly sharing your knowledge and giving your time to engage. As I just said, this is a rare opportunity where 1 week post an event, the experts are ready. This just demonstrates the commitment that you have towards supporting this country, support for SMEs, and really Invest in Africa is proud to really have you. I want to thank our distinguished participants, the SMEs. You've remained engaged with questions after questions, and it's such a testament that there is an appetite for risk-informed SMEs. And I see this resonating very well with the themes that we had today, that you're ready to partner, you're ready to become risk-informed, and it just validates this whole engagement, and it's bringing us closer to where we want to get to in developing a resilience framework for the SMEs. So I really want to thank you. Thank you very much for responding to the poll questions, those that did. And I must say that the findings today are quite informative, a bit surprising, but they just are pointing us to the direction we need to invest. I think we are more encouraged that we need to invest in risk resilience. So ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say that yes, this was the first Ask an Expert session, but it is the first out of many, and it has been successful being the first one. We are going to be hosting another one soon this month, and our guest contributor, Jacob Flewelling from DFC, will be providing that facilitation. He will be available to answer your questions on how you can benefit from the work of DFC. As you know, they provide and facilitate private development projects in the lower and middle income countries, and Jacob is the one responsible for Africa. So they are very keen to understand and engage SMEs and take us through their funding criteria and respond to your questions on how you can work with them if you're looking for financing in the form of equity. So we will be announcing when that will be happening, but that is within this month. We really want you to continue to be involved in this dialogue series. And I would like to also announce that the third dialogue series will be held on Wednesday, 24th February from 2 to 4 p.m. And our engagement today and the last one just goes on to building for dialogue, the third dialogue series, which will be about enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response to building back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. Just as Njoki has mentioned and has sensitized us today that we are not yet in recovery, and I just said, aha, we are not yet there. So thank you so much. And I think one thing I must say is that we've gotten a lot from Steve in terms of government, the tangible opportunities existing in government. A lot of times we don't know what's going on. And Steve, I think this is amazing to just learn what the government has in place, what the ministry is doing. So lots of insights from both of you with Njoki. We are leaving this room better than we came, with insights, with direction on how we can enhance our preparedness. So thank you so much.